Hey, thanks for coming by and checking out Pete Snakebite Kid again. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole on drag racing, where it came from, street racing, and more importantly, what effect has street racing had on your life? I think you're going to be surprised. Okay, first things first, I want to be very clear. I do not condone doing anything dangerous or illegal. You should obey laws and you should be safe at all times. You should race someplace where it's safe and away from other people and you can't hurt anybody. The other thing I want to be clear about is the statute of limitations on anything I may or may not have done and anything my friends may or may not have done has long since passed. Racing on the street is stupid and dangerous. I think we can all agree on that, but there's going to be street racing. And in my opinion, the more places there are for people to race safely, the less street racing there will be. Now, I may not be a good example of that because we would go to Orange County and to the Brotherhood drag strips and we still street race on the weekend. But statute of limitations is over on that. And do as I say, not as I do. But I want to tell you a little bit about what it was like back then. Hey, maybe before I tell you what it was like, I'll tell you what it was not like. Well, if you've ever seen one of the Fast and Furious Vin Diesel movies, it's not like that. Well, at least I don't think it was because I've never been able to sit all the way through one of those movies. Very entertaining, but when I first heard about that movie coming out, I was pretty excited. It was about street racing and not the same place, not the same thing. The other thing, I never heard anybody say NOS. I think that's short for nauseated because that's what I feel like when I hear somebody say that. It's nitrous oxide, or it's nitrous, or it's the bottle. Anyway, those films are entertaining. Our cars never flew out of airplanes or anything like that. Trust me. Let me tell you a little bit about what it was like. So I think it's pretty hard to talk about street racing in Southern California in the 70s and the 80s and not talk about Big Willie Robinson. You talk about somebody that's bigger than life. Big Willie was bigger than that. He was a big, tough dude. And what he wanted to do was to bring people together through racing, through drag racing, and through street racing. But when I mean people, I mean gang members that might prefer to be out killing other people that were instead street racing or drag racing. Now, he was for doing it in a safe manner, and he did have a drag strip for many years on Terminal Island down by Long Beach, and it was called the Brotherhood. It was his club was called the International Brotherhood of Street Racers or something like that. But Big Willie was quite a guy. A couple of things that stick in my mind about Big Willie. You did not want to mess with Big Willie. It was very clear just from looking at him how things would go. I would hear him say time and time again, there will be no fights at my drag strip. And to put this in perspective, at one point, the Brotherhood drag strip was open from noon on Friday until midnight on Sunday. Morning, noon, and night, all the way through. And, in the middle of the night, things got crazier, and there were different crowds that were there at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning than there was at noon on a Saturday, and so on, you can imagine. We were there one night. It was probably 2 o'clock Saturday morning. I think we had my friend Harlan's car, a big block Camaro apart, and, doing a jet change or something, and we hear some things getting louder off in the distance, and there was a crowd of people. And we hear Big Willie, booming voice, say, I said there would be no fights in my drag strip, in that booming voice. And if you're going to fight, you're going to fight me. And then it was a little bit quiet, and then it kind of broke up again and started getting loud. Then I heard a short blast from an automatic weapon where he apparently had shot a machine gun in the air to get everybody's attention. And then to clarify things, he said, I said there would be no fights at my drag strip. We got my buddy's car together, decided to not make any more passes, and we headed home after that. We were there one Saturday night for a pro-gas meet, and we were up in the tower talking with Big Willie and his wife Tamiko after the race was over and just kind of hanging out and chit-chatting. And somehow the subject came up about Willie not allowing alcohol at the drag strip. And he had always said that this is on LA Harbor property. They will not allow the sale of alcohol. He must have said it 100 times, And we were talking about that. He said, well, the truth is, I hate alcohol. I don't want anybody drunk at my drag strip, and I think it tastes foul. That's why it was never here at my drag strip. So I thought that was pretty cool. No alcohol at a drag strip, in my opinion, makes it a little safer, but kind of a funny quirk how Willie ran things. The other cool thing about the Brotherhood in Terminal Island was you could run nitrous oxide there. In the 70s, nitrous oxide was kind of a dark art, and it wasn't accepted in conventional drag racing. There was no NHR classes where it was used, and the guy that did the tech inspections at Orange County would check for it. And if you had nitrous or they thought they found it, you weren't able to run it. And they I don't know what they thought. It was just not well understood, I don't think, at that point. So I'd get my car in either place without anybody seeing it. It was pretty well hidden. But I thought it was cool that you could go to the Brotherhood and, you brung what you brung. That's the way it worked. And, you think it's going to go fast with nitrous and you think it's safe, then go ahead and run. I mean, they wanted to make sure that you had, lug nuts on all the studs and the battery was held down and you didn't have fuel leaks. You had a catch can for the coolant and those kind of things. But nitrous, it was okay.
Today, everybody walks around with a high-quality video camera in their pocket. Back then, not so much. So, don't have a lot of pictures of back then, which is kind of sad. But here's a really rough picture that my friend Daryl sent me a few months ago. This is my Boss 302 when it was powder blue, and his Corvette 65 Roadster, really nice looking car. We're making a pass at Terminal Island, and you can see the Vincent Thomas Bridge in the background. And it was kind of a rough looking place, as you can see, but it was awesome.
Okay, street racing scene in the 70s and 80s. Late 70s to mid to late 80s, let's say. That was, my tenure there, right? It was awesome. It was really the greatest time. But this will sound like I'm saying, don't do what I did. And I am saying that, but there's some really good reasons. If you go to a street race back then and, you roll into Scotty's, that was our place where we'd go and eat hamburgers and tell lies and set up races, right? Then we'd go to Santa Fe Springs Road, or we'd go to Shoemaker, Little Shoemaker, we'd go to Phoebe Street or Four Lanes, or we had all these places, right? If you roll in there with a car that ran 11 flat, went 120 miles an hour, right? You were one of the fastest dudes. There may have been some guys with 9-second cars that were trailer cars with a big block and a bunch of nitrous and slicks, and they didn't really go straight, and they were scary, and they blew up. I mean, that's what a 9-second car was on this street then. But, the majority of them were 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-second cars that were there, playing the game, and doing that. Now, I guarantee you go to a street race now, there are cars that run more than 120 in the 8th mile when we were happy to go 120 in the quarter mile. Literally, these speeds in comparison are much more lethal than the cars that, we were racing and hanging around with. The other thing is, the cops are more serious about this stuff now. Yeah, we got chased off a lot of times. I understand some people actually got arrested for it, I heard. And now they just block off the streets. Like, we would just scatter when they came and maybe somebody'd get a ticket. Now they block off the streets. They've got paddy wagons. They're taking people to jail. They're writing cars up for everything. They're impounding some of the cars and crushing the cars. Like, it's not what it was then. And sorry if, you're that age now. It just ain't as much fun as it used to be. And I really think it's much, much more dangerous than it ever has been. I mean, you watch these, is theater, but you watch the Street Outlaws and those things. Those cars are terrifyingly fast, considering that they're even on a no prep track, right? And you've seen, stuff go wrong on those if you've ever watched that. It's not as bad as Vin Diesel, but it's more theater than actual street racing, in my opinion. But anyway, street racing when I grew up was the coolest thing. I'm so happy that I got to do it when it was a time where it wasn't as dangerous as it is now. And, made some of the best friends I've ever had are still my friends that, we did all this stuff together. And that's what we talk about every time we're together, because it was it the best time of our lives? No, because then we got married and had kids, and that was way better. But street racing then was cool. I wish you could have been there with me, but...
Now, the Star Wars universe, pun intended, is so big and so vast and growing all the time, it's almost hard to imagine your life
without Star Wars and all the associated things that came along with it. Where would Star Wars be without that street race on Paradise Road? So American Graffiti, it was one of the highest grossing movies in 1973. George Lucas wanted to tell the story about what it was like growing up where he grew up in Modesto, California, and the kids seeing the coming of age and the street racing. Think about this for a minute. If it was not for street racing, if it was not for George Lucas making a very successful movie, American Graffiti, you might not know what a lightsaber is. Think about that for a minute. So I mentioned before, when I was a kid, we lived in Venice, California, and not far from us was the original Shelby shop. And we actually had heard the cars drive by and stuff when I was a kid, which was pretty cool. But even closer to my house, right across Venice Boulevard, was Venice High School. That's where my mom and dad went, all my aunts and uncles and so on. But one summer, they changed the name of Venice High School to Rydell High. That's right. That was the setting for Grease. Why was Grease the biggest grossing movie in 1978? I can tell you why. Because it all led up to a street race. Well, maybe a sewer race. I've personally never raced in a riverbed like they did there, but it was a fun movie anyway. Okay, we'll talk about one more race. This was not a drag race. This was not really a street race, but it was a grudge race. This was probably one of the most important races if you really think about automotive history, hot rodding and performance and so on. 1901, Henry Ford had failed at a car company. He needed some scratch, some money to make his next car company. He needed some notoriety. Henry Ford really didn't believe in racing throughout his career, which is kind of weird because the only reason he was successful is because of the most important race of his life and probably the most important race in Ford history. 1901, October 10th, Henry Ford raced Alexander Winton, who was the most famous racer at the time in America. And they had a 10-lap race. There were some other cars involved in it, but I think by the time the race actually came around, there was just two cars running, and it was Winton and it was Henry Ford. Winton had a much faster car, much more powerful car, was a very experienced racer. Henry Ford had literally never raced before. Winton's car didn't make it to the end or didn't make it very well, and Henry Ford ended up winning the race. Because of that, he ended up with some money to invest in his next company, which eventually turned into the Ford Motor Company. A couple things came from that Ford deal that you might know about if you're a car guy. One thing called a Holley carburetor. Holley made cars and carburetors at one point. Henry Ford said, "I'll put your carburetor on my car and I won't make carburetors if you promise not to make cars." Then a thing came around called a 4-barrel Holley carburetor in 1957 for a Ford T-Bird, and we have a thing called a Holley 4-barrel. Then it came along a motor called a shotgun, a Bosch 429, that needed a gigantic Holley carburetor. Yes, the Dominator was made for the Ford shotgun. So you knew I was going to get here. Something really cool that came about 60-something years after Henry won that race is a Shelby Cobra. I love how this history stuff ties together. We had some fun with it. I hope you enjoyed it. Be safe. Let me tell you a little secret. I have heard it's possible to outrun a cop. I've heard it's possible to outrun a helicopter. I don't recommend doing either one. They get really upset. So I've heard. You guys be safe out there. Keep it on the track, and I will see you on the next one.